Welcome to the Reel Debrief, the show where we dive deep into the world of film production, exploring the genres you love, the projects making waves, and the trends shaping the industry. We're here to give you a 360-degree review for entertainment professionals. So grab your popcorn and get ready for some expert insights. And, well, the occasional bed joke from Talen. It's the Reel Debrief. Now your hosts, Talen and Lisa.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. I'm Talen, and as always, I'm here with Lisa.
Hey Talen. Hey everyone. I'm excited for today's episode because we're talking about a movie that blends the macabre with comedy in the best way possible. Today, we're diving deep into Tim Burton's Beetlejuice and the long-awaited sequel, Beetlejuice Beetlejuice.
That's right, Lisa. Burton's original Beetlejuice was released way back in 1988, a year after I was born, and it's one of those films that still holds a special place in people's hearts, not only for its weird, quirky charm, but also for the incredible performance by Michael Keaton as the repugnant Beetlejuice himself. Burton's mix of grotesque humor and heart made Beetlejuice an instant classic. And now, more than 3 decades later, he's finally back with a sequel, Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. Now, before we jump into the movie, let's revisit the original and talk about why Beetlejuice became such an iconic film. Lisa, what stands out to you the most about the 1988 film?
Oh, there's so much to say about the original. For me, one of the standout elements is how Tim Burton and Michael Keaton created such a bizarre yet strangely compelling character in Beetlejuice. By the way, it's interesting how they played with the name, spelling it Beetlejuice for the title, but taking it from the demon's name Betelgeuse from astronomy. Keaton brought this mix of menace and mischief with his grotesque appearance, barf-stained face, and lewd, lecherous attitude that made him unforgettable. It's fascinating how Burton took this centuries-old demon character and infused it with such manic energy. Even though Beetlejuice is on the screen for less time than you'd think, his presence looms large over the entire film.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, Beetlejuice is such a strong force in the movie that even though he's not the main focus, he doesn't even show up until about halfway through. His personality is so larger than life that it feels like he's there the whole time. And that's really a testament to Keaton's performance, right? I mean, he plays Beetlejuice as this chaotic, almost carnivalesque figure, like a trickster or a mischievous spirit, but also with this sleazy, unpredictable edge that keeps you on your toes.
Definitely. And what makes Beetlejuice even more interesting is how Burton keeps him as something of a red herring. As much as the title is about him, the movie isn't really about him. It's about the Maitlands, the deceased couple played by Alec Baldwin and Geena Davis, who are trying to haunt their house after dying in a car accident. They're the heart of the film, while Beetlejuice is more of an impish presence who exists to shake things up. But Burton's decision to limit Beetlejuice's screen time is key. A little of that character goes a long way, and too much might have overwhelmed the other elements of the story.
I hadn't even considered that. That's good. That is such a good point. Beetlejuice is often remembered as a wild ride of special effects, ghoulish humor, and Keaton's crazed performance. But at its core, it's a story about a family, life, and death. The Maitlands just want to live in peace even after they're dead. They're kind, well-meaning, and, in a strange way, much more human than the living characters like Charles and Delia Dietz.
Oh, the Dietz family is another brilliant layer of this film. Jeffrey Jones and Catherine O'Hara as Charles and Delia Dietz are hysterical. Charles is this bland suburban dad who just wants a quiet life, while Delia is this neurotic, self-obsessed sculptress. Their move from New York to the old Connecticut farmhouse and their attempts to modernize it set the stage for the central conflict. They clash with the Maitlands, who just want them out of their house.
Right, and the Maitlands, who are now ghosts, hire Beetlejuice to scare the Dietzes away. I mean, but that backfires spectacularly. What's interesting is how the film plays with the idea that the afterlife isn't some peaceful release from life's problems. In fact, it is just as complicated and bureaucratic as life itself. The afterlife in Beetlejuice is full of waiting rooms, paperwork, and red tape. I mean, it's kind of hilarious how mundane and frustrating death is in this world.
It's such a unique take, right? The afterlife in Beetlejuice is both whimsical and grotesque. You've got shrunken heads, bureaucratic caseworkers, and ghosts who have met all kinds of bizarre, violent ends. Burton's style is so distinctive. It's a combination of gothic horror, absurd humor, and this very tactile, handcrafted special effects work that makes the world feel both fantastical and grounded at the same time. Those old-fashioned handmade effects are still captivating today because they have this real, tangible quality to them.
Oh yeah, I love the practical effects. I mean, you can really see the craftsmanship in the stop-motion animations, the prosthetics, and the practical effects themselves. Even though some of it might look dated by today's standards, it adds to the charm of this film. The banister turning into a snake, the grotesque faces of the dead, the underworld's blue-green palette, all of it feels like it's been pulled straight from a nightmare, but a weirdly funny one.
Exactly. And that brings us to Lydia Deetz, played by Winona Ryder. She's the one who really bridges the gap between the living and the dead. Lydia's this goth teenager who's more at home with ghosts than with her own family. She's so alienated from her parents and from the world that she's almost relieved to find out that ghosts exist. Ryder's performance is one of the standout elements of the original, and it became a star-making role for her.
Oh yeah, Lydia's fascination with death, her gothic aesthetic, and her disconnection from her family really resonated with the audiences. I mean, she became an iconic character in her own right, especially for people who felt like outsiders. And her connection with the Maitlands is what gives the movie its emotional core. Despite being dead, the Maitlands become a surrogate family for Lydia. And I mean, it's that bond that ultimately resolves the conflict, right? It's funny, heartwarming, and just the right amount of creepy. All right, now that we have that covered, let's fast forward to today. And now we have Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, the sequel to the original. Tim Burton, Lydia Deetz, Delia Deetz, and Beetlejuice are all back, and this time there's a new generation involved. Lisa, would you please walk us through the basic premise of the sequel?
Of course. Beetlejuice Beetlejuice picks up more than 30 years after the events of the original film. Lydia, played once again by Winona Ryder, is now a paranormal investigator with her own occult-themed talk show. She's buried the hatchet with Delia, her eccentric stepmother, played by the ever-hilarious Catherine O'Hara, and the two of them have a more amicable, if still quirky, relationship. But there's new tension in Lydia's life, her estrangement from her teenage daughter Astrid, played by Jenna Ortega.
You got it. While Lydia's still very much involved in the supernatural world, Astrid's a skeptic. I mean, she can't stand her mother's supernatural nonsense and is more grounded in science and logic. I mean, the dynamic between mother and daughter becomes one of the central conflicts of the movie.
Exactly. And Burton introduces some big changes from the original. For one, the ghosts of Adam and Barbara Maitland are no longer part of the story. They've moved on, as Lydia explains through a loophole in the bureaucratic afterlife. Their absence is felt throughout the film, and it's probably the most haunting thing about the sequel. But their departure leaves room for new plot developments, including some major shifts in Lydia's life.
And of course, one of those big shifts is the untimely off-screen death of Charles Deetz, Lydia's father. And this is where things get tricky because the actor who played Charles in the original, Jeffrey Jones, hasn't had many roles since 2003 due to legal troubles. The film sidesteps his absence by having Charles meet a grisly demise early in the story, setting the stage for Lydia's emotional journey. The funeral scene is a perfect callback to the original film, complete with a choral rendition of Deo, the Banana Boat song, a tribute to the film's iconic dinner party scene.
Yes, that callback was one of the highlights for me. It's such a smart way to pay homage to the original while also moving the story forward. After Charles's death, we get introduced to Lydia's boyfriend Rory, played by Justin Theroux. And let me tell you, this guy is something else. He's this insufferable New Age therapy speak kind of character who decides that the best time to propose to Lydia is at her father's wake. If that's not in bad taste, I don't know what is.
Yeah. I mean, it's like Burton decided to amp up the absurdity from the very start. Rory's proposal is just the beginning of the chaos. The film immediately kicks into high gear with its signature brand of dark humor and bizarre situations. And of course, before long, who should show up but Beetlejuice himself?
Yes, and this time around Beetlejuice, or Beetlejuice as he's now officially credited, is just as gross and mischievous as ever. Michael Keaton steps back into the role like no time's passed at all. There's something timeless about the character of Beetlejuice. He's still this revolting, impish, chaotic force of nature who thrives on causing trouble, and Keaton plays him with the same manic energy.
Oh yeah. I mean, Keaton's Beetlejuice is definitely one of the highlights of the sequel. The character hasn't changed much, which is a good thing because part of Beetlejuice's charm is that he's this immutable force. But while he's the same, the world around him's changed. Lydia's now older, wiser, more jaded, and it's clear she's not as easily swayed by Beetlejuice's antics.
Exactly, Talen. One of the most interesting aspects of Beetlejuice Beetlejuice is how it explores Lydia's growth as a character. In the original film, Lydia was this gothic, death-obsessed teenager who felt like an outsider in her own family. But now she's grown into a woman who's fully embraced the supernatural and made a career out of it. As a paranormal investigator and talk show host, it's a logical progression for her character, but it also sets up some tension between her and her daughter Astrid.
Yeah, and that's the core of the new family dynamic. Lydia's relationship with her daughter mirrors, in some ways, her own relationship with Delia from the original film. But where Lydia was intrigued by the supernatural, Astrid is a science-minded skeptic. She has no patience for her mother's occult interests, which creates this interesting dynamic where Lydia, once a rebellious teenager, is now the one being challenged by her own child.
It's a clever reversal, and it adds a new layer to the film's exploration of family. In the original, Lydia found a surrogate family in the Maitlands, and now she's struggling to connect with her own daughter. Astrid represents the rational modern world, while Lydia is still tied to the mysterious supernatural one. It's a classic case of generational conflict with a Burton-esque twist.
Yeah, I also loved how they brought back Catherine O'Hara as Delia. She's still the same larger-than-life character, but there's a warmth to her now that wasn't there before. She's grown closer to Lydia, and their relationship has evolved. Delia's more wacky and less uptight, and O'Hara brings that perfect blend of humor and heart that makes her scenes some of the most entertaining in the film. But let's not forget the elephant, or should I say demon, in the room. Beetlejuice's return is the centerpiece of Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. Burton's approach to the character is fascinating because while Beetlejuice hasn't changed much, the world he's in feels even more unhinged than before. There's an even crazier, more chaotic energy to the sequel. It's like Burton decided to crank the Looney Tunes vibes up to 11.
Absolutely. The visual design of the film is even more elaborate and surreal than the original. It's like Burton took the blueprint from 1988 and expanded it with all the new tools at his disposal. The underworld in this film is deeper, richer, and more absurd. There's this non-stop momentum to the movies that feels like it's constantly escalating, especially when Beetlejuice is involved. He's disemboweling himself, spinning his head, and performing all sorts of grotesque stunts with that same gleeful nastiness we saw in the original, but now it's even more outlandish.
Right? Keaton really throws himself into it. There's a scene where Beetlejuice literally spills his guts. Like his intestines are all over the floor. And you can tell Keaton is having a blast. It's the kind of slapstick, grotesque humor that Burton does so well. And speaking of grotesque, we can't talk about this movie without mentioning one of the new characters, Dolores, Beetlejuice's long-lost, long-dead wife.
Oh yes, Dolores. What a fantastic addition to the cast. She's played by Monica Bellucci, and in true Burton style, she's a corpse bride in the most literal sense. Dolores is Beetlejuice's long-forgotten wife, And she's hell-bent, quite literally, on reclaiming him as her husband. She's this dangerous, domineering force who's not just scary. She's got a twisted sense of humor, too. Bellucci really nails the part, adding this delicious mix of elegance and horror.
Yeah, Dolores is one of the standouts for sure. She's got this eerie, almost regal presence, but Burton gives her some of the best slapstick moments in the movie. I mean, there's a particularly gruesome scene where Dolores performs a body horror slapstick routine, I don't know what else to call it, that involves her staple gunning herself back together. I mean, it's classic Burton, both grotesque and hilarious at the same time.
And it's interesting how Dolores fits into the larger themes of the film, especially when you consider Burton's fascination with marriage and commitment. In Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, we've got multiple characters dealing with love, commitment, and relationships in different ways. There's Lydia, who's torn between her skeptical daughter Astrid and her smarmy new age boyfriend Rory. Then there's Beetlejuice, who's being pursued by his psychotic ex-wife Dolores while also trying to marry Lydia.
Oh yeah, I love that point, Lisa. Marriage and commitment are central themes in this movie, just like they were in the original Beetlejuice. I mean, the film ended with Beetlejuice trying to marry Lydia in exchange for helping the Maitlands scare the Dietz family. I mean, in the sequel, we've got not one, not two, but 3 wedding plots. Lydia is being proposed to by Rory at her father's wake, Beetlejuice is once again trying to marry her, and Dolores is trying to reclaim her undead husband.
It's all very Burton-esque in how it plays with the concept of love and commitment. Marriage, in this world, is as chaotic and messy as the afterlife itself. And just like in the first film, the weddings in Beetlejuice Beetlejuice aren't about romance. They're about power, control, and survival. Beetlejuice wants to marry Lydia because it gives him a foothold in the living world. Dolores wants to reclaim Beetlejuice for her own twisted reasons. And Rory's proposal feels more opportunistic than romantic.
Right. And Burton uses all of this chaos to comment on relationships in general. Whether it's the dysfunctional marriage of Delia and Charles in the original film, or the complicated family dynamics in the sequel, there's always this underlying theme that love and marriage are messy, unpredictable, and sometimes downright ridiculous. I mean, and that's part of what makes this movie so fun.
Another interesting angle in Beetlejuice Beetlejuice is its commentary on Hollywood and the entertainment industry. Lydia's talk show, which is all about the paranormal, is portrayed as both genuine and exploitative. It's rooted in real paranormal events, but it's also a commercial venture that benefits from ghoulish spectacle. There's a funny parallel between Lydia's talk show and the way Hollywood treats its own reboots and sequels.
Yeah, and I love that Burton added a layer of satire here. I mean, Lydia's talk show is a clever reflection on how Hollywood sometimes mines its own past for material, turning the supernatural or the nostalgic into a commodity. I mean, it's a fun little jab at the entertainment industry obsession with sequels, remakes, and reboots. And of course, it's even funnier when you realize this movie is a sequel itself. But one that doesn't feel like a cash grab. It feels like Burton is in on the joke.
Totally. And then there's the ghost detective character played by Willem Dafoe, who used to be an actor in life but now can't stop performing for non-existent cameras in the afterlife. It's such a clever bit of satire on the idea that once you're in the entertainment industry, you can never fully escape it, even in death. Dafoe's character is a hilarious commentary on actors who are always on, performing even when there's no audience. Burton loves to blur the lines between the absurd and the real, and this is one of those moments where you're laughing, but there's also a truth to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect metaphor for the endless performances that some people, especially in Hollywood, can never escape. It's one of those delightful touches that make Burton's movies so rich in satire without being too heavy-handed about it. Dafoe's fantastic in the role, bringing this exaggerated theatricality to the ghost detective, which fits perfectly with the film's tone.
And it also fits with Burton's larger critique of the entertainment industry. Beetlejuice Beetlejuice has fun with the idea of art and commerce colliding, especially through characters like Delia. She's a great target for some art world satire. In the original film, she was already an over-the-top sculptor who was obsessed with her own self-importance. But now in the sequel, she's mining her family's grief for artistic inspiration. There's a moment where Delia is already thinking about turning Charles's death into her next big multimedia project, which is just so absurd, but also hilariously on point for her character.
Right? I mean, it's as though she's commodifying tragedy, which again ties back to Burton's critique of how entertainment and art can sometimes become exploitative. Even though Beetlejuice Beetlejuice is a sequel, it doesn't feel like it's falling into the trap of pandering to nostalgia or cashing in on its predecessor's success. Instead, it uses its status as a sequel to poke fun at the very idea of sequels and reboots. All right, now let's talk about the visual design of Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, because as with any Tim Burton film, the visuals are crucial to the experience. In the original Beetlejuice, Burton created this tactile, handcrafted world that was both eerie and whimsical. The stop-motion animation, the practical effects, and the use of color. It all felt like stepping into a funhouse version of the afterlife. So, how do you think the sequel's visual style compares to the original?
The sequel definitely builds on that aesthetic, but with some modern flourishes. Burton still leans into the old-fashioned, handcrafted feel of the first movie, but he also incorporates more advanced CGI, though he does it sparingly. The underworld sequences in Beetlejuice Beetlejuice feel even more elaborate and detailed than before. There's that same Looney Tunes-like energy, but the scale is bigger. Burton knows that part of the charm of the original was its imperfections, the stop motion, the slightly rough around the edges effects, and he's smart not to smooth all of that out with CGI. Instead, he uses digital effects to enhance the world, not overwhelm it.
Oh, and that's one of the things I really appreciated about the sequel. It still feels like a Tim Burton film through and through. I mean, there's this texture to the world that's missing from a lot of modern films that rely too heavily on CGI. Here you still have the quirky, handcrafted feel, but it's been expanded to fit the larger scope of the sequel. The design of the underworld, for instance, feels even more surreal and twisted. There's more depth, more layers to explore, and it still retains that playful yet creepy atmosphere.
Totally. One of the visual highlights for me was the hellish wedding sequence, which takes place toward the end of the film. It's this bizarre, goose-lathered spectacle with multiple brides and grooms, all set against this grotesque backdrop. Burton goes all out with the visual chaos, and it's both disgusting and kind of beautiful in its own way. The costumes, the set design, it all has this otherworldly Tim Burton trademark style that's hard to describe, but instantly recognizable.
I like that. All right, now, we can't talk about Beetlejuice Beetlejuice without diving deeper into Michael Keaton's performance. We touched on it earlier, but Keaton's return as Beetlejuice is really the heart of this sequel, right? He's as repugnant, funny, and chaotic as ever, but there's also something nostalgic about seeing him back in this role after all these years.
Yes, Keaton just slips right back into Beetlejuice's mold like no time has passed. He's still got that manic energy, but there's also this slight weariness to him, as if centuries of haunting and causing chaos have finally caught up to him. He's still this gleeful trickster, but there are moments where you sense that even Beetlejuice might be getting tired of his own shtick. It's subtle, but it's there. It adds another layer to the character that wasn't as present in the original.
I like that. That's an interesting point. There's definitely a sense of continuity with Keaton's portrayal. Beetlejuice still has all the same gross-out humor, the slapstick, and the con man persona, but he also seems more reflective in a weird way. Like he knows the game by now, and yet he still can't resist causing trouble. I mean, one of my favorite moments is when Beetlejuice crashes Lydia's life again. He's still trying to manipulate her, but you can tell Lydia's wiser and more guarded this time around. She's not the same gullible goth teenager he tried to marry in the first film. Their interactions have a different dynamic, and it's fun to watch Keaton play off that.
Yeah, and Keaton's chemistry with Winona Ryder is just as strong in this film as it was in the original. Their scenes together really anchor the movie emotionally. Lydia has clearly grown, but she still has this complicated relationship with Beetlejuice, almost like a twisted mentor-mentee dynamic. But that's part of what makes the sequel work. It's not just trying to repeat the beats of the original, it's building on the characters and the relationships in a way that feels natural, even in this very unnatural, supernatural world.
Yeah, now, speaking of dynamics, we can't overlook Jenna Ortega's role as Astrid, Lydia's science-minded daughter. Ortega is definitely a rising star, and in Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, she brings this fresh energy to the film that contrasts beautifully with the more established characters.
Yes, Jenna Ortega is fantastic as Astrid. She brings a totally different vibe to the film. While Lydia is all about the supernatural, Astrid is rooted in science and reason. Her skepticism and no-nonsense attitude provide a great counterpoint to the madness around her. It's like she's the voice of reason in a world that has completely lost its mind.
I mean, yeah, and that's what makes her such a perfect foil for both Lydia and Beetlejuice. She's not easily swayed by the supernatural shenanigans, and that gives her a kind of strength that Lydia didn't have in the original film, right? Ortega plays Astrid with this sharp, sarcastic edge, but she's also very grounded. It's clear she cares about her mother, even if she thinks all the paranormal stuff is absolute nonsense.
And as much as Astrid tries to distance herself from the supernatural, she eventually gets pulled into it, much like Lydia did in the original. But what's interesting is that Astrid's journey isn't about accepting the supernatural, it's more about understanding her mother. It's a different kind of coming-of-age story, one that's less about ghosts and more about reconciling with family.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so when we look at Beetlejuice Beetlejuice in the larger context of Tim Burton's career, it's fascinating to see how this sequel plays into his themes of reanimation, both literal and metaphorical. And like you said earlier, every sequel is a form of creative reanimation, bringing something back to life that had already come to a logical end. And who better than Tim Burton to tackle the idea of reanimating a beloved franchise?
Exactly. It's almost poetic that Burton, a director known for his obsession with the afterlife and disturbing the dead, has made a sequel to Beetlejuice after more than 3 decades. The sequel, like Beetlejuice himself, refuses to stay buried. It's this act of bringing the past back to life, but in a way that acknowledges the passage of time. The film isn't trying to be a carbon copy of the original, it's doing something new while still honoring the spirit of the first.
Yeah, and you can see that in how Burton handles the characters. Lydia, Delia, and Beetlejuice have all evolved in their own ways, but they still feel like the same people we met in 1988. And that's a tough balancing act, especially for a sequel that comes so many years later. But Burton, he pulls it off by keeping the core of these characters intact, even as they've grown older and changed.
In the end, Beetlejuice Beetlejuice is exactly what you'd want from a Tim Burton sequel. It's wild, irreverent, and full of heart. It's not trying to outdo the original, but it's building on it in a way that feels fresh and true to the characters we've come to love. Burton has a gift for walking that line between the macabre and the sentimental, and this film is no exception.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. And you know, it's rare for a sequel that comes decades later to have this much charm and integrity, right? It doesn't fall into the trap of just being a nostalgia trip. There are plenty of nods to the original film, sure, but Beetlejuice Beetlejuice stands on its own as a chaotic, fun, and oddly touching story about family, love, and the absurdities of both life and death.
And that's really Burton's legacy, isn't it? He's always been interested in these larger-than-life outcast characters who live on the fringes of society. But at the heart of it, his films are about connection and finding a place where you belong. Whether that's in the afterlife or among the living, Beetlejuice Beetlejuice might be a fun, zany romp through the supernatural, but it's also a reminder that no matter how weird or different you feel, there's always a way to connect with others, even if it's through ghosts and ghouls.
Yeah, Lisa, that's well said. And it's true. I think that's why Burton's films resonate with so many people. There's this idea that even in a world that's dark, bizarre, or downright terrifying, there's room for joy, humor, and even love. Beetlejuice Beetlejuice captures that perfectly.
Exactly. And while it may not be as groundbreaking or conceptually rich as the original, it doesn't need to be. It's fun, it's weird, and it has something to say about life, death, and everything in between. For a sequel that came more than 30 years after the original, I'd say that's a pretty impressive feat.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Burton proves once again that he knows how to inject his unique blend of creativity and heart into just about any project. Whether it's his original work or revisiting old favorites, he brings a personal touch that makes his films stand out. And Beetlejuice Beetlejuice might be a sequel, but it's also a testament to his lasting impact on the world of cinema. All right, and so before we wrap up, I have to ask, do you think we'll see more from the Beetlejuice universe? I mean, this sequel definitely leaves the door open for future stories.
It's possible. Given the success of Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, I wouldn't be surprised if the studio is thinking about it. Plus, with characters like Astrid now in play, there's room to explore new dynamics and adventures. Tim Burton has always been selective about sequels, though, so it would depend on whether he feels there's more to say in this world.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Burton does tend to avoid doing sequels unless he feels he can bring something new to the table, which is part of what made this one so exciting. I mean, if there's another installment, I hope it continues to evolve the same way Beetlejuice Beetlejuice did, building on the past while pushing the story in new directions.
I agree. And if this is the last we see of Beetlejuice, Lydia, and Delia, I think they've gone out on a high note. It's been such a joy to revisit these characters and see where they are now. But if Burton does have more up his sleeve, I'm all for it.
Same here. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Beetlejuice Beetlejuice is a fantastic follow-up to the original, and a great reminder of why Tim Burton's unique style continues to captivate audiences. Whether you're a fan of the original or just jumping into the Beetlejuice verse, there's something for everyone in this wild ride of a sequel.
Absolutely. It's been so fun breaking this one down. And if you haven't seen Beetlejuice Beetlejuice yet, go check it out. It's a movie that reminds us that even in the strangest, spookiest corners of the world, there's always room for humor, heart, and a little bit of madness.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Lisa. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into the world of film. Until then, just remember, say his name 3 times, and Beetlejuice just might show up.
And who knows what kind of chaos he'll bring.
Take care, everyone.
This has been the Reel Debrief. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, like, rate, and review. We'll see you soon on the Reel Debrief.